Welcome to my third tutorial. So in this tutorial I will be talking about how to shoot a bullet or projectile in a game. So picking up from where we left off, we talk about collision, but this time we want to add a bullet, right? Because our game, it's not much fun if there's no bullet, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to track the angle the player is going to be shooting, right? So create a variable. I just call it gun angle and set it to 0 by default. And then we also want to check if the player is facing left or right, right? So just create a variable also to represent that, whether the player is facing left or right. So in this case, I'm just going to check if the player is facing left. If not, you can assume the player is facing right, right? And also create a gun sprite node that we can use to represent our gun in the game. So let's go back to our scene here and add the gun, right? Here's our scene. Now the player doesn't have a gun, right? We want to give him a gun. So let's create one. Here I use GIMP. I'm just gonna do a new. I'll just create a simple gun object, right? Let me add alpha channel to this so I can remove and make it transparent. Alright, then I'm gonna make a simple gun object just by doing like that. I'll paint it black. Why not, right? And let's create a handle for the gun. You can make yours as complex as you want. I'm just gonna make mine simple, just for the sake of testing this game. And then let's crop this out, right? This will represent our gun. Boom. Alright, and then let's export this. In our desktop, you can export whatever. Actually, for the sake of this demo, I'm just gonna do it in desktop. I'll just call it gun png. Export it. Export. Alright. Let's create one more, maybe two more things. Command Z to do go backward. The other thing I want to create is the bullet, right? So let's create a bullet. And for this case, I'm just gonna create a simple rectangle to represent a bullet. Well, we have one here. I'm just gonna create one, maybe a smaller one, like that. I'll paint it. Let me see, bright blue, something you guys can see. All right. You know what? I'll just do it orange, or orange right there, something like that, like a bright orange. All right. Boom. That's just that represents our bullet, right? And let me crop this and export it. Bullet. Export it and export it. Another thing I want to do is also, how do we track the angle that the player want to shoot, right? So we want to do something when the player press on the screen somewhere for him or her to be able to adjust the height of the angle, right? The player is shooting. So how do we do that, right? So for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to create something to track that, to follow the player touch. So I'm just going to create a simple circle here just to represent that. You can see it, visualize that happening in the game, right? So let's color this. Yeah, why not? Some cyan color, I believe this is called. And let's just crop this and let's export that. Let's just call this angle tracker, right? Angle tracker. This tracks the bullet angle when the player touches. And this lets us know where the angle is at, right? Let me put this down. Oops. Oh. Alright, so now that we have all the assets we need for this, let's add it to our scene. You remember how we do that? We just kind of go here and add the file we created to the scene. And if you ever want to edit any of this stuff, for example, let's say your player looks weird or whatever, you can always do this. Show in Finder, double click it, and then edit this with your image editing software. I like to use GIMP because it's easy. Whatever you edit in GIMP will get updated automatically in this project folder. So that's another way you can edit it, or just create a new one and replace it. Alright, moving on. Let's go back to our game here. So here we want to give the player a gun, right? So how do we do that? again, we just go to view, show library, and that will show us all the asset that we have added so far. Here's the gun, right? So I want to add this to the scene, right? Let's make the gun somewhat like this. I want the gun to pivot maybe from here, right near so it looks like it's not just spinning in the middle, right? So how do we do that, right? To do that, we just set the anchor to 0, so that way it pivots in the back end here. And I also want the gun to be, well, about that size, right? But we want the gun to be controlled by the player, to move where the player is, right? So how do we do that? Let's call this gun, just for the sake of our tutorial, or player gun. And then to do that, we add it as a child of the player. That way, whatever happened to the player happened to the gun. So if the player moved left or right, you should also see the gun move left and right. So let's do that. I'm just gonna run this and show you guys how that looks. Well, I'll let it load and get ready, then I'll show you guys. But in the meantime, you have this player gun object, right, that you created, right? So how do you add that to the game? So in the game, you want to do player gun equal player dot child, because it is a child of the player, right, with the name player gun. If you look here, you see that we call it player gun, right? Alright, now that our simulator has loaded, let me show you a little bit of what it looks like when I run the game. Well, it's taking a little longer than usual. I should have loaded this earlier, but anyway, when that's ready, I'll show you guys. In the meantime, just make sure you have these 3 variable: a player object called sprite node, a gun angle, and a player face left. For something that checks. This is what we're concerned with when we're shooting a bullet, right? And then after you add the gun like I did before, make sure you have this just like this in your did move to view. Alright. So let this load for a little bit. Running iPhone Pro 14, okay. So here you have your gun, right? You remember how I told you when the player moves, the gun follows? That works because the player is, the gun is a child of the player, right? Alright. Now to have that working, I want to do one other thing. I don't want the enemy to disappear when the player touches it, because let me see. I think we have a method called player collision here somewhere that I created last time. Here you go, player collision. Let's just comment this out so we don't just remove the enemy by accident when the player touches the enemy. Alright, now that we established that, how do we go about shooting the gun, right? Well, first we want to track the gun, right? So how do we do that? What we want to do is track the angle, right? That's what I meant by tracking the gun. Track the angle. What we want to do is we want to have a place that the player can touch to update the gun angle, right? So let's see. Let's add our what do we call it, tracker to the scene to track the angle. So again, go to show library, angle tracker, just add it to the scene somewhere. It doesn't matter where, because this is only gonna show up for the sake of tracking the gun, right? This is just for testing purposes, so it's just so that you can visualize what's happening, right? Player to be able to touch anywhere in the screen and then choose an angle from that touch location, right? And that will update the angle. So let's call this let's just call this angle tracker. Boom, right, like that. Go back to your game scene and add one more thing here that I've got to add. Add another sprite node called angle tracker. Angle tracker, just like that, right? So here you have something called angle tracker, just like that. I'm gonna copy that to make sure the name are the same, just so it's consistent, right? So Now let's add that angle tracker to our scene in the did move to view method. Tracker equal basically just copy this because we're adding it to the scene itself, not to a child of anything, and just update the name. And now that we have that, we can track the angle of our gun, right? Let's see here. Alright, so how do we change the angle when we touch the screen? So to do that, we want to update our touch move, right? So what happened when the player touch and move anywhere in the screen, right? So here we're not going to use this method. This is an old method for moving the player. We're going to create something like this. This is a method I copied from an old game, so I'll just call this angle tracker. Just change this to angle tracker. Let's see. Alright, so let's add this to your code, and this will update the angle tracker. This number here, I'm just gonna let me create that number. Let let me call this. I'll just call this num equal 4, for example, 3. So this number is the amount of angle that's going to increase between 0 and 90. And what we're doing here is we're just having this angle tracker follow the touch location where the player is touching. And you can see the angles first we create an action where the angle tracker will follow this touch location because we run the angle toucher. The angle tracker object runs that action, right? And then to handle gun angle, we're just gonna look at the location and angle tracker energy position, Y position compared to the touch location and Y position to the angle tracker Y position, right? And if it's less than 90, we move it up or move it down depending on where we touch it, right? And that's what we're doing now. So when I run this code, you should see the angle tracker following the touch location. So here's the code again. So if I touch here, you can see it. Hold on. Let me see. I don't want to change the alpha to 1 so you can see it better. I don't want 0. When you do your game, you want to remove this because you don't want the player to see that. That's just so you can visualize the angle. Also, let me print the angle as I'm moving in the touch move. Also, I want to be able to print the angle. And programmer, we usually print just to we check that our variable is being changed. And to print a variable, you do it like this, backslash, and in parentheses you put your variable gun angle. Alright, you should see the gun angle being updated down here as I'm printing. As you can see, the gun angle updating up and down, right? Now that we have the gun angle working, how do we update the gun itself, right? How do we make the gun, we gotta ask ourselves, how do we make the gun point up or down, right? Excuse me. Let's see here. Update the gun movement. Enough, give me a second here. So to update the gun angle, we want to go back to update method. And you remember how we said the update method is called before each frame is rendered? We want our gun to update its angle based on that position, right? And and you want it to pivot at its anchor point. Remember how we changed anchor point close to the edge on the left side? So we want to do this. Player, I'm gonna call it gun. I think I call it player gun. Yeah, player gun rotation, and we want to do this. Degree to radian is a method I create that, of course, converts degree to radian. If you jump up here, I already added the method. Make sure you have this to method. This will be used to do angle calculation. And now that we have this method in update, this will update the gun's angle. So let me make a comment here. Angle. So I'm gonna run this again so you guys can see what I'm talking about, right? So what we wanted to happen is that when the player touches up and down, we want the gun angle to update, right? That allows the player to shoot left or right, right? You know, left or right. But also, what we're concerned with is not just, you know, the angle, but also whether the player is facing left or right, right? So when we shoot our gun, what are we looking for? Player face left, player face right. And how did that happen, right? When player face right, of course, this can be pointing this way. But when the player face left, the gun should be pointing that way, right? So how do we do that in the game? And a game is not exciting if you can only shoot in one direction, right? Where the gun is pointing, right? So to do that, we will pretty much check our touch begin method, right? So in our touch begin method, if you go down here, you have, you know, left button being pressed, right button being pressed, right? And that sets the move right, move left to true, right? So let's remove this to avoid confusion. But also when you're moving left, we have this variable we create up here, the track players facing, right? So here it says player face left is true, is false, I mean, by default, right? So that means by default players facing right, alright? So when your players facing is when the left button is pushed, you want to set that to true, right? Because we want the player to set to face left, right? And we also want to set our player to face left, right? So how do we do that? So what we can do is we simple function that will flip the player's image like so. By setting it to -1, we force the player to face left. And then what happened when the player faced right, we want to do the same thing except we wanted to flip the opposite way and set this to false. Because when the player is going right, it's no longer facing left, right? So if I press play again, I'm going to show you guys how that works. So see how the player is facing right and pressing left? See that? Yep. Alright, so now that we have that established, it's time to shoot the bullet, right? So to create a bullet, you can create a bullet that's really simple if you want to. That just basically is a sprite node that, you know, get impulse applied to it, and that like acts just like another object in the game that hits the enemy and do something. But bullet usually has damage, right? You know, like a bigger caliber, you know, cause more damage than a small caliber, for example. So for that, what we want to do is create a class called bullet. Here I create a class called bullet. It's basically just a sprite node class, and then in the init method, which is like your constructor, right? I added one property called damage, right? Damage int, you know, and I just set a constructor like so. And make sure you have that new Swift file added. So to do that, you simply just go here, new file, select a Swift file, press next, give it a name. I name mine bullet just like so. Since I already created it, I'm not gonna create it again, obviously. And then just make sure you have this code in your bullet class, right? So now that we have our bullet, how do we go about shooting that bullet, huh? Right? That's what I want to know. So when we want to shoot a bullet, we want to basically what we're doing is we're launching a bullet, like we're applying impulse to it, right? So we launch a bullet. So But for us to do that, we need a button that allows us to press that shoots the bullet, right? We don't have a button right now that says shoot, right? So I'm just gonna create another bullet using another button. I mean, sorry, not bullet. Let's just call it shoot. You can call whatever you want. I'm just gonna create something simple. So, you know what? I'll make a circle. So it's different. All right. Maybe, yeah, circle. I'll just make this one. What color should I make this one? Let's make this one green, right? Because why not? Not too bright, like that. And let's make it green. And let's just add a label to this. Just call it. Give it a letter S, right? You just gotta play around with this until you get it just right. S, okay. That's about center enough. Whatever. I'll just crop this. This will act as our shoot button, right? You can create yours however complex or not. It's up to you, really. I'm gonna export this just like we did last time. I'll just call this shoot button PNG, and I'll add that to our game. Export and go back to your project. So here, go back to your asset folder just like before, and open that file that you just saved. Here I created something called bullet, right? So just move that into your assets folder. Now you can use it. I'm just gonna delete this. Exit it out. So on my game scene, I want to add that button here, right? So that we can the user can drag with to shoot the gun, right? So let's do that for now. Where's that? Shoot button. Okay, so let's put it above this one and make it maybe a little smaller, somewhere right there. All right. Boom. And we'll just call this shoot button. And just like before, because this is a control, just like the rest of this other stuff here, this, and this. Let's make the Z position 1 so it's above everything else, just like so. Now you have a button you can shoot. In the game scene, let's add that button to the scene. That's another thing that I've got to do, is add that shoot button to the scene. So create a variable that represents that. Actually, you know what? I don't have to do that. Actually, I can just, because it's already added to the scene, I don't have to add it here unless I want to play around with it. I can just simply go to my method touch begin and check for when the user touched that node, just like here. I can just do this, and I believe I call it shoot button. You only want to add something to the scene if you plan on controlling the thing in the scene, like the player, for example. But doing it this way should work also. You know what? For the sake of this video, I'll just add it anyway. Let's just copy this and just call it. This allows you to reference this button later in your code if you wanna mess with it somewhere else. I'm just gonna copy this and do this and shoot button. Shoot button. Alright. So in touch begin, what it's doing is just looking through the whole scene and look for that button called shoot button, right? Button. And what to do here when the button, when that node is selected, in our touch location, what do we want to do, right? We want to launch the bullet, right? We want to shoot the bullet, essentially. So here I have a method called shoot the bullet, right? And shoot gun, And in this method, it takes in an integer value of velocity, like how fast you want the bullet to travel, right? So if the player equip, a more powerful gun, the velocity be higher, right? But in this method checks which way the player is facing before it calls the launch method, right? So if the player is facing left, obviously it's gonna reflect over the y-axis and then shoot it in this direction, right, to the left. And if else it's gonna assume the player is facing right, it's gonna shoot that direction, right? So what you want to do is have this method in your class, in your game scene class, so that way you can shoot the bullet. And then also have this method called launch. Launch is down here. So launch simply does two things. First, it creates the bullet, and then it apply impulse at the bullet, so the bullet is being projected in that direction, right? So what we want to do here in this launch method, if you can see right here, the first thing we want to do is we want to um, figure out the speed. How hard do we want to shoot the bullet, right? So we can adjust this value by multiplying by 5, whatever. We can adjust this value by multiplying by 5, adding to it, however you want to do it. Just adjust it depending on your game, right? In this case, I just multiply by 5, and that would be our bullet speed, right? And then we want to convert the angle to radians, right? And then we want to create here I'll just call bullet. I copied this code from another game, so ignore the error. We want to create the bullet and set the damage, right? We'll call it this. We'll set the texture to be bullet texture, right? So if we go here, I believe we have a texture called bullet. Let me go back to our asset just to make sure we have that texture. If you don't have a texture called bullet, yes we do. We have a texture called bullet. So just make sure you have that texture. So when you go in your scene and you create a new bullet object, for example, it's gonna require a texture, right? And we call it bullet. We'll just give it a name bullet also, so it's not too confused. And then we'll just set the position of that to be the same position as the player, right? And let's set the damage level to be 2. The damage is used later down the line when the bullet hits something. For example, if let's say the bullet hit a player, right, or an enemy, for example, if the enemy has a life of 10, we want to maybe take 2 from the enemy's life, right? Because the bullet has a damage of 2, right? That's why we set this here, because bullet damage can vary depending on what kind of bullet it is, right? And here I'm just going to set a physics, just like when we go into game scene. You know how we add physics to enemy, for example, we select the body type, right? Whether it be bounding circle, alpha mass, or rectangle, right? Just like we did that there, we're doing this programmatically here. So we're just doing a bounding circle radius with the width of the bullet divided by 2, right? That's going to be the size of our bullet. And because we make our bullet a physical object, we have to assign it a category bit mass, a collision bit mass, and a contact bit mass, right? So remember how we created enumeration earlier here, where we assign number to the different category of object in our game? Our bullet would be 8, right? So to access that, let me go back to that method again down here. So to access that number, we just access our numeration, right? Then give the bullet the raw value. That assigns the bullet to the bullet number. And then for the collision bit mass, we check the different thing that the bullet can make contact with. Building, ground, enemy, right? Same thing with this one. After we create its physics and sets its physics, we can go down here. We can set its scale however you want. Depending on the picture you use, the bullet may appear to be too big or too wide in your game, so you can set the scale. And the bullet position, I'm just going to make it Z position. I'll make it the same as the rest of the game object. And then what we want to do is calculate where to launch the bullet from. Here I created a constant 20. This is just a number that you can adjust how far you want the bullet to start before it gets launched, right, from the player. So that's why I call this from player. And it checks if the player facing left or playing facing right. Depending on that, your value can change, your math can change, right? Negative or positive. And then after that, you just add the bullet to the scene. As soon as the bullets get added to the scene, you want to apply impulse it, right? G vector, direction X, direction Y, right? And multiply by the speed, and then you just run the impulse by doing bullet physics by the apply impulse, right? And that should shoot your bullet. So now that we have our shoot button, let's shoot bullet, right? shoot gun. Let's put a velocity of 5. Okay, let's run our app now. Now that we have our bullet, a way of changing the angle and a way of manipulating which way the player is facing, we can now launch our bullet, right? Right now it's not doing much because we're creating it, but we're not. Let me see, we created. Shoot. Let me adjust the value of launch bullet distance from player. Let's do 50. Alright, let's do it. If the bullet is being created in the same position of another physical object, it's going to collide that physical object and not move. So that's why I'm adjusting the distance from the player. Alright, for some reason it's not playing pause. Let's see here. Bullet touchscreen. Let me increase the impulse here. The speed, the velocity. And touch begin. Let's increase the velocity to, I don't know, 50. Let's see what happened. Alright, give me a second here. Launch bullet. Let's see. What am I doing? Does not working. Give me a second, guys. Sometimes in coding you have problem like this where you left scratching your head trying to figure out what you did wrong, Oh, I think I know. Give me a second here. Shoot bullet, shoot gun, launch angle. Where is that? Speed. This should be bullet speed. Yep, bullet speed. Alright, let's see. Now it should work. As you can see, it's moving. But the bullet is too far from the player, so that's why you adjust the distance from player. Let's do 100. So you just kind of play around with that, and that allows you to get a feel for where you want your bullet to be. See, now I can shoot the bullet left and right, and you can adjust the strength of the shot just simply by adjusting how much velocity to add to your shoot function, right? So if I go back to my touch begin here, I have a shoot gun function. I'll apply it 50. So if you want it to shoot a little faster, for example, let's double that, right? So here when you press run, you should see that the bullet is shooting a little faster now. So you can, of course, angle the gun and shoot it, right? Oops. Shoot a little faster now. Another thing I want to talk about is making the bullet disappear, right? We don't want our bullet to just stay there all the time. How to make it disappear, right? So when, let's say, the bullet hit the enemy, for example, right? We don't want the bullet to linger in our scene, adding more node to our node count. You can see there 23, right? We want the bullet to disappear over time, right? Excuse me. I'm feeling a little better, but not quite better. So what we want to do is we want to remove it, but slowly, like fade remove node, I guess you can say. So here I'm just gonna create a function that you can use again and again. Um, let's do uh, seconds double seconds, like that. This will apply an action that fade out and remove the node after number of seconds, right? So first create an action and apply that second fade out action, of course, and remove from parent in a sequence of action, right? And then we just add the fade out and the remove action to that sequence, and then have the node run that. That's all we're doing here. So you know how we launched the node earlier, right? In our launch method here, we add it to the scene, but we never remove the bullet, right? So that sucks, right? What we want to do is we want the bullet to disappear over time. So let's call our method we just created. And for our node, let's add the bullet node there. So once it's added to the scene and it's being launched, we want to remove it right away, right? Start removing it. Maybe remove it, have it fade after, I don't know, 3 seconds, for example, right? So by running this, the bullet should disappear after 3 seconds. I'll show you guys that here. So here I shoot my bullet, right? Boom. Give me a second here. Boom. And you can see, look at the node count. First you have 10, right? Boom, 11. And then 1, 2, 3. Boom, back to 10. You see how that works? That removes the bullet from the scene, so it prevents your app from taking too much memory and slowing down your game. So what we can do here now is we can now check what happened when enemy touches bullet, right? You remember how we in the first no, the second tutorial I created a collision for enemy, right? Like a method for enemy collision to check what happened when enemy hit something. So here we can check for when enemy hit the bullet. What do we want to do when enemy hit bullet, right? So when enemy object hit a bullet object, what do we want to do? The bullet object, as we already applied to our launch method, remove the bullet once it's created after 3 seconds, right? But we want our bullet to destroy the enemy, right? Instead of pushing it away, we want the enemy to disappear as soon as we shoot the enemy, right? So here you may want to add, let's say your enemy has a, I don't know, a health, for example. Let's say the enemy's health is 10, right? And you shoot the enemy. Every time the bullet hit the enemy loses 2 life points, right? So it takes 5 shots to kill the enemy, right? So that's why we have bullet damage. Enemy should also have his own health point that we will do in the future, but for now, for the sake of this demonstration, we can do this. We can check for when bullet hit the enemy, right? So we say if the enemy hits a bullet, what do we want to do? We want to remove the enemy, right? So here we just do instead of enemy, this should be called player. I mean enemy, so it's not to confuse ourselves with this other method. So what we want to do is enemy hit by, let's call it bullet, just so we can see that it did happen. And then we remove the enemy, right? Move from parent. And now if the bullet hit the enemy should disappear instead of being pushed too far. So let's see here. Boom, boom, boom. See how the enemy disappear? That destroys the enemy. And that's how you do shooting a gun in the game. I do this way so you can adjust the angle and everything, but this blue thing you can also remove. For the sake of just testing this game, I like to have this blue thing follow the movement of the angle so you can adjust it, right? But when you actually produce your game and publish it, you don't want to have this blue thing showing, so you can just simply you can simply set that to 0 by default. Go in your game scene, set to 0, or let me see here, it should be alpha. That's what you're looking for here. Alpha should be 0, enter, and that's 0. If you don't do it there, you can also do it in your game. You can do it in your did move to view scene where you set that to 0, or you can just when you do touch move, so that's only happen when you of course, when you touch and move at the same time, you can set this to 0, just like so. That way it just disappears. That thing don't have any physics object, I think, so it's not gonna interfere with anything else you have in the game. So now you have a perfectly clean looking game that you can just kind of like play around and manipulate and shoot. Yep, just like so. Well, that's all I want to talk about today, guys. Thanks for watching my video and support me. Please subscribe and like. Um, this is a new uh, YouTube channel I'm trying to kind of grow by teaching you guys how to make games, apps. Um, I'm pretty tech savvy in a way, I guess. I like teaching and I like coding. And if you guys support me, I can continue to do this and hopefully change y'all's lives. So anyway, please show your support and subscribe. Thanks.